Alrighty, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today. My name is Cecilia Begum. I'm the Director of Clean Energy Jobs Coordination at Texas Climate Jobs Project, and I will be our facilitator today. Again, we are here for the methane mitigation in Texas, 35,000 union jobs for cleaner air webinar. We're really excited to dive in together. Before we do that, we want to let everyone know that we are recording this webinar and it will be available for viewing after this event. For our agenda today, we're going to start with a welcome. We will then be able to hear directly from our researchers about this report, and then we'll have time for questions and answer. For the Q&A, we will be using the Q&A function here on Zoom. You should see two little chat boxes with a Q&A under it, and that's where you can submit questions throughout the webinar. We will not be using the chat for questions, so please send them there. And let's go ahead and dive in. So just, to start, we want to introduce ourselves. If you're not familiar with Texas Climate Jobs Project, we launched in 2021, and we are a statewide organization. We are a coalition of over 20 unions across the state. And our mission is really to advance a pro-climate and pro-worker agenda. And what that really means is addressing the climate crisis while also creating union jobs to sustain our families and our communities here in Texas. We partner very closely with the Texas AFL-CIO. And before we dive into talking about our new report on cutting methane emissions and creating jobs across the state, we are honored to have President of the Texas AFL-CIO, Mr. Rick Levy, to welcome everyone to the space. Rick, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, and thanks everybody for joining us. And thanks especially to Christopher and Gregory, the researchers who put this report together that kind of lays out a roadmap to where we need to go in terms of methane in this state. The Texas Climate Jobs Project is dedicated to a simple proposition, and that is that if we really want to solve the climate crisis in this country and in this planet, we have to address the needs of workers, and that addressing the needs of workers and addressing the needs of the climate are two problems that go hand in hand. Our project rejects the notion that addressing climate change is a job-killing effort. And to the contrary, as you can see from our report, which we launched this project with, that climate change and addressing climate change is an opportunity to create literally millions of good family-sustaining jobs in this country. In fact, we showed a roadmap to creating over 1 million union jobs in Texas alone in an effort to address our climate realities. So look, people get it that we need to change the way we do business if we want to sustain this planet. But that change cannot be on the backs of working people. It has to be in coordination with working people, with working people's needs at the very table where these plans are made. So that's why we're so excited about this project, the Methane Project, where there is no downside to plugging leaking wells. And leaking wells are a major source of pollution in this that we're trying to address. We can create jobs. Again, this is a perfect example of the whole theory of our practice in action. And the report that was issued and the response that we've already seen to it has been so gratifying. I think Texans are really hungry for climate solutions that actually lift up our communities. So deep gratitude to the Texas Climate Jobs Project, Cecilia, and to Chris and Gregory, who at the Ray Marshall Center, who have been an amazing partner in this effort. So thank you all for joining us. Let's learn together. Let's keep working on this together. There's a lot more where this came from, so let's make sure that this works. All right. Thanks, Cecilia. Turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Rick, for your leadership and for being here with us today. And now we can dive into this research. So just last month, we released this report titled Mitigating Methane in Texas, Reducing Emissions, Creating Jobs, and Raising Standards. And it's been really exciting time to talk about, these findings and this research, with folks across the state, in the labor movement and with community groups, and with the media. And I'm honored to pass it to our report co-authors, Christopher Agbo, Research and Policy Coordinator with the Texas Climate Jobs Project, and Gregory Compton, co-director of the Ray Marshall Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Christopher, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Cecilia. First of all, what is methane? Methane is a greenhouse gas that contributes to the warming of the planet. It is one of the many greenhouse gases, and one of the two key ones, second to CO2, that contributes to climate change. And it is emitted in every stage of the oil and gas supply chain, from production, transportation, storage, and distribution. Now, in the oil and gas production chain, methane can be emitted whether intentionally through flaring or unintentionally through pipeline leaks. And why is this so important for Texas? Well, in Texas, we are the top oil and gas producer in the country, and as a result, we emit the most methane in the country. Texas emits around 14 million CO2 equivalent of methane, and this is by far the largest in the entire country. As a result, any legislation or funding concerning methane mitigation, Texas will be the state to benefit the most from this, from any sort of funding or legislation concerning methane. There are a variety of health effects or harmful health effects that come from methane emissions. Methane contributes to 35% of ground level ozone. It directly contributes to respiratory diseases like asthma and causes over more than 1 million respiratory deaths annually. Now, our report focuses on two key sources of methane mitigation. One, the EPA's methane rule, and the Department of Interior's off-and well plugging program. So the EPA methane rule is still being finalized, still being drafted, but it is incredibly extensive, and it will affect every stage of the oil and gas supply chain. It would affect almost every facility and equipment used to produce oil and gas. And the off-and well plugging program, it's an incredible program, an incredible funding opportunity for Texas, as the DOI is providing around $380 million for the states to plug off-and wells. Now, these off-and wells and abandoned oil wells are located all around the state, from the Panhandle to the Permian Basin to the Gulf Coast, and they are located in very, very dangerous areas, for example, on farmlands, on ranches, or in low-income communities, next to schools, next to playgrounds. And the danger of all this is that due to the fact that these often oil wells are usually not plugged, or they're usually just left alone by oil companies, they can leak into the oil can leak into the water supply, could affect crops. So it's incredibly crucial that Texas deals with this, as it's a ticking time bomb. Now, in our report, we estimate that up to 35,000 jobs can be created for Texas to implement the EPA's methane rule and the DOI's off-and well plugging program. Now, Texas as a state has oil and gas infrastructure across every region, and from areas like these jobs will be created from areas ranging from the Permian Basin, the Panhandle, the Gulf Coast, North Texas, Concho Valley. Overall, this could mean a 6 to 8% increase in oil and gas industry jobs, focused exclusively on addressing methane emissions in the industry.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Really appreciate all of the terrific work you're doing on this. My name is Greg Compton. I am the co-director of the Ray Marshall Center, and I work to estimate the number of workers that would be needed to address methane emissions and ameliorations, both by EPA standards and also more broadly to address them. We really use two methods to arrive at the number of workers. The goal for arriving at that number was to find the number of hours really it takes to do the work. And so we used two ways to get at that. One, we have some information about how long it takes certain tasks to finish. So that way we know how long that takes. And then if we know the number of sites that we're working with, the number of components we need to repair or replace, then we have the ability to measure the number of workers needed. Where we lack that information, we use known and cited costs of installation and maintenance, and then use those costs to estimate what we expect to be the hourly cost of work, and then leading to the calculation of the number of worker hours for each of those items. To determine the number of sites, we really looked here at two pieces. Wherever possible, we wanted to use Texas-specific data. Fortunately, there's a lot of data on the number of oil and gas wells, both active, inactive, in Texas, as well as particular other sites that we examined. And then where we didn't have access to that data, we use national data, and then use the estimates of Texas portion of that to determine the number of sites. So combining both the number of hours required and then the number of sites, that gives us a sense of the number of workers needed, the number of time completed, and how long it will take for everything to be complete. So next slide. We really tried to look at a broad swath here of the types of sites that we would need. Some of them are maintenance, some of them will be repair, some of them are amelioration efforts. We looked at leak detection and repair for oil and gas wells, as well as for compressor stations, pneumatic controllers to replace those across the state, which are notorious leakers of methane, compressors, as well as storage tanks and orphan well sites as well. So we were trying to really get here as broad a sense of all of those components that would be impacted by EPA regulations or by the Department of Interior's efforts, particularly with the orphan well sites, to be as comprehensive as possible to really get a sense of what would the total number of jobs be. So next slide. And here in the report, we break down in some detail the number of jobs for each of those types of sites. And you can see that the pneumatic controller replacement is fairly high. Those are the largest number of jobs. Those are going to be required by EPA, and it would hopefully be fairly comprehensively done. And that's dealing with nearly every oil and gas site across the state. And some of those here may not take a lot of work hours to accomplish. You see some numbers of just adding 150, but they're still important to calculate. There's really two types of work that we're talking. One is the replacement and abatement work. So this is the type of work where we're going to go in, make adjustments, change components. That work, once completed, will be finished, right? But there's also a fair amount of work here that is maintenance, right? And that maintenance effort is going to be ongoing over time to make sure that, particularly with things like leak detection and repair, if it's discovery of that detection, that continues, and therefore we need continued workers for those items. There are estimates in the report. We sort of do an over 10-year estimate of how those jobs might pan out, and so we demonstrate both the growth as well as some of the decline, and then the maintenance work there as well. Next slide. And I think I'm turning this back over to Christopher. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Gregory. Now, as previously mentioned, these jobs would be located in almost every region across Texas. Now, this is a map showing the locations of orphan wells in the States. As you can see, they're very, very widespread. So, from the Panhandle to the Permian Basin all the way to the Gulf Coast. So this methane mitigation program is something that will benefit every part of Texas. It's something that affects every Texan, and it's an issue that we should all care very much about. Now, as Gregory mentioned, these jobs would range from maintenance to replacement and abatement. They will also be very technical and specialized. Plugging orphan wells is something that could go very, very wrong. There are examples of companies plugging an orphan well using just, trash and rubbish, and then the well that keeps leaking, and then it becomes more costly to replace it, more costly to fix it. So these jobs would need to be done by very, very highly trained workers with proper safety regulations. And how do we ensure that these 35,000 jobs created will lead to good paying, family sustaining union jobs? Well, first of all, we need Davis-Bacon and prevailing wage requirements, project labor agreements, labor peace agreements, Department of Labor registered apprenticeship programs, and higher road employment practices on these projects. It's very, very crucial that these projects are done by very, very highly trained workers. Some of these projects, such as the orphan well plugging program, will be done using federal funds. This is taxpayer money, and we have to ensure that they are done well, that we don't waste the hundreds of millions of dollars that will be provided by the federal government for the state to plug these orphan wells. Additionally, we have to show that even though these are good environmental jobs, that we can't just leave them to be done by companies that don't pay workers well or care about worker safety. As a state, Texas is one of the states that has one of the many states that have subpar labor protections. We are the only state that does not have workers' comp, and we have to ensure that these practices do not extend into the methane mitigation industry. And the way to ensure that is by implementing these recommendations.
Great. Thank you so much, Christopher and Greg, for that overview of the research. And thank you for all of your work to bring these findings to all of us. Now we have time for questions and comments directly with the panelists here. So as we shared at the top of the presentation in the webinar, folks can use the Q&A function on Zoom to submit questions.
Thanks, Cecilia. We've got a question from Cyrus Reed of Sierra Club. Do you see any potential for state leadership to work for good union jobs in Texas and for methane controls? Would you agree that it would take federal leadership to move us forward on creating methane jobs and controls, given state opposition to the EPA methane rule and the fact that no legislation dealing with improving methane controls or bonding cleanup requirements had hearings in the legislature? Basically, there doesn't seem to be interest within Texas. What's the Texas versus federal interaction going to look like?
Yeah, well, the key thing is that there is all this money and all this funding and legislation coming down to Texas, regardless of any sort of state reaction. And it's crucial that the state gets ahead of this. As previously mentioned, we are the top emitter of methane in the country. And so any sort of legislation or any sort of funding concerning methane mitigation would benefit Texas the most. And again, as our report shows, the state has the potential to create 35,000 jobs, tens of thousands of good paying family sustaining jobs. And we have to ensure that we are at the forefront of this.
I'll add to that in that, Texas oil and gas companies actually already, there is some effort to engage in this work. They want to also reduce methane emissions. It's not good for business either. Methane that you're leaking is losing out on potential profit as well. And I think that though at the state level of overall, I don't know what kind of movement we'll see. Sometimes in Texas, we do sort of a soft implementation where local workforce boards working with businesses develop sort of these efforts to train and bring people through in target industries. And this should be one that they should focus on in the future. But absolutely, the federal pressure is helpful.
Thanks, Christopher and Gregory, and thanks, Cyrus, for the question. We've got another question from Larry Leinenschmidt about what is the status of the Railroad Commission accepting federal funds for well plugging?
So there are 3 stages of the orphan well plugin program, and overall Texas has the potential to qualify for around $380 million. And we know that late last year, the Railroad Commission accepted some of this funding to plug orphan wells. So we know that it's, again, like I previously mentioned, that this money is available, and this money this legislation and funding and the interest in methane mitigation is a fact. And so as a state, we have to ensure that these jobs that we create from methane mitigation are good paying, farm sustaining jobs, and we have to ensure that to ensure that there has to be registered apprenticeship programs attached to this project, PLAs and labor project agreements attached to these jobs.
Great. Gregory, anything to add there?
No, I think Christopher's pretty succinct on that.
And could you expand a little bit on why it's so important that these jobs be done to high quality? And that what the current state of play looks like with how some well capping is being done out in West Texas?
Yeah, well, again, these orphan wells tend to be located in farmlands, or if you go to Houston, you'll see these orphan wells located in low-income communities, and they leak into people's water supply. And so it's a matter of health and safety for them to be plugged well. And I know there are various instances of these orphan wells not being plugged up to standard, and they just keep leaking. And then it's just a waste of money. It's a constant money hole. So we have to ensure that in order to make sure that our environment is safe, that our communities are safe and healthy, that these jobs must be done by workers that are highly trained, and they must be done safely.
Great, thanks for that. We've got a question from Wayne Lord about can methane mitigation work in conjunction with the geothermal industry?
Of course, there are instances of people or companies retrofitting orphan wells or oil wells to for geothermal energy. And again, but this report mainly focuses on just the EPA methane rule and the Department of Interior's orphan well plugging program. But again, that sounds like a very, very interesting topic.
Great, thanks. This might be one, Rick, if you're able to take this. I think there's a question from Leo Lindner about have contractors in Texas shown interest in using union labor? And obviously, Christopher and Gregory, feel free to weigh in here too, but felt like hearing Rick's perspective on this would be really interesting.
Sure. Thanks for the question. Absolutely. I think that what more and more contractors are realizing is that the battle for the future in Texas is going to be about access to skilled labor. And if there's one thing that unions can do better than anybody else, it's train workers. And we've seen major upswings in interest in our apprenticeship programs, training a whole new generation of workers. And we've had a number of contractors engage in conversations with us about how do we get access to this pool of workers that we see going around doing so much work. So in answer to the question, yes, I think there is definitely contractors who work with union workers, and that's growing as opposed to any other dynamic. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Rick. We have a question from Lexi Garcia. What is the pipeline like for making sure we can reach workers, students, and everyone where they are, including folks in non-union jobs? And I think the question is about making sure that folks hear about the opportunities outlined in this study. But Lexi, feel free to post in the question and answer again if that's not what you meant specifically.
Yeah. So part of this whole project is reaching out and educating people about the opportunities that are available. There are going to be so many opportunities in this realm available because of the requirements and all of the major federal legislation that's been passed that's going to be flowing into Texas. It's our job to get the word out into the communities and into workplaces around the state that these are opportunities that are going to be available. One of the things that we're working on and that we're most excited about is, apprenticeship is it's a path to a lifelong learning and self-sufficiency. Once you have your skill and your trade, you can work anywhere at any time and know that you'll be providing for yourself and your family, both now and in the future. A lot of people don't know about apprentices, so we're developing more and more programs to get into the schools to let folks know that if college isn't for you, this can be something that's for you. But the other part is that, there are skills that are required to even get into apprentices. There's math, there's life skills, et cetera. So one of the things we're doing in Harris County, Austin, San Antonio, other places around the state is providing what we call pre-apprenticeship programs, where we give folks the opportunity to spend 3 weeks really learning about what the different trades are, what the opportunities are, what's required, and bringing them up to a basic skill level so that they can enter the formal apprenticeship program. So I think what we're seeing is the result of a lot of kind of historic hostility to this kind of program among state leaders, and just education in general hasn't always seen this as a viable path. But it is more and more now. And so unions are the ones that are leading the way to make sure those opportunities are available in communities around the state.
Thanks, Rick. That's super helpful. We've got a bunch more questions in the chat. Christopher, could you talk a little bit more about where these jobs are going to be created, where the potential targets are located, and what regions have the most to gain from the work that you're talking about in this study?
So these jobs will be located in every part of the state, but they'll be concentrated in places like the Permian Basin, the Gulf Coast, Panhandle, North Texas, Contra Valley. But overall, every part of the state will benefit or will have hundreds of jobs created from methane mitigation.
Great, thanks. We've got a follow-up question from Leo Lindner about what the standard is for plugging orphan wells, and if current wells are being plugged, the current wells being plugged are meeting those standards or not.
So the proper way to plug an orphan well involves pouring cement to prevent the well from leaking into aquifers or any sort of water supply. However, there have been very many instances of contractors not using the proper material, or using, trash or just rubbish to plug the orphan wells. And this is not enough to prevent the wells from leaking. And so it's very, very crucial that these jobs, especially the ones funded by federal money, are done using the best possible standards.
Great. Thanks, Christopher. We have a question from Jose Corpus about if you have any leads in securing any of the federal funding for training in methane mitigation.
I think we're still kind of we're number one, engaging with the Railroad Commission to make sure what the rules and regulations are going to be about, how that's going to be done, and also going through all the federal legislation to figure out what the requirements are and making sure we're positioned to make those jobs available. So I say thanks for that question, but we'll and definitely keep in touch with us as we kind of move forward to the implementation phase of this.
Great. Thanks, Rick. We've got a question. Given the findings of this report, what would you all say, Christopher and Gregory, to folks who are worried about environmental regulations, quote, killing jobs in Texas?
Yeah, one of the key purposes of this report is to dispel the toxic narrative that environmental regulations are job killers. This report shows that, on the contrary, they are job creators. That you can create, just in methane mitigation alone, Texas can create over 35,000 jobs. And these jobs can also be good paying, family sustaining jobs that pay high wages that can, sustain an average family. And in order to do that, we must, especially in methane mitigation, we must have project labor agreements, Davis-Bacon wages, labor project agreements, and registered apprenticeship programs. So the entire report shows that environmental regulation is not a job killer, but rather it's a job creator.
Yeah, I would add job opportunity, right, for this. We don't hear critiques, when the price of oil is like really low. A lot of oil companies pull back, and so they fire a lot of employees, and we don't hear, oh wait, they're firing people just because the price of oil is low, right? Because it's not as efficient for them. They can't make as much money, and so to say the same thing here, just the regulatory environment shifts, and you need to respond accordingly, right? And particularly when there are such positive local environmental and global environmental consequences for not addressing these issues. Those are even things that we're not even weighing in this calculation primarily. We're just saying, would you create jobs? And the answer is yes. And would they be good jobs? Yes.
Additionally, these jobs are going to be in addition to existing jobs in the oil and gas industry. So we are estimating that overall, this will be a 6 to 8% increase in the jobs in the oil and gas industry, specifically just to mitigate methane emissions.
Great. Thank you so much, Christopher and Gregory. We've got one final question, and then folks, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. We've got another 5 to 10 minutes we could take on questions if folks are interested. We have a question about whether these companies are that would be doing the methane mitigation work are union friendly.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. Rick, do you want to speak to it yourself?
I just think that there are some that are and some that aren't. But, the reality is that while we certainly advocate for unions because we think that's the best opportunity, these opportunities are not just going to be limited to union workers. And part of what we're advocating that all of these jobs be good jobs and that they may meet the requirements of federal law. And that this is about opportunity for Texans. And that's I think the main point of this report is that to break that link that as the previous questioner asked, addressing climate change can be one of the greatest job creators that we've seen in our whole lifetimes. And we need to get off this old, tired out line that is trotted out by state officials so often that dealing with climate change is a job killer. It's exactly the opposite. And the report that Gregory and Christopher have authored just presents that starkly in black and white. And we really appreciate that.
Great. Thanks so much, Rick. Cecilia, before I pass it back over to you, just wanted to check if Christopher or Gregory had any final words or final thoughts they wanted to share, and Rick, you as well.
I just want to thank you for this effort, right? And the importance of this, and to look at this in such a different way than is typically viewed, to provide counter narratives to something that is out there sort of as the zeitgeist without much evidence, which is that regulations will kill jobs. And so this is a terrific opportunity to sort of test that hypothesis and to find it faulty here. But also just so important for Texas, the people of Texas, and the wider environment.
We have one, thanks for that, Gregory. We have one more question from Cyrus Reed of Sierra Club, who asked whether y'all looked at the funding available through the methane emissions reduction program through the Inflation Reduction Act, and whether that would create jobs as well. I don't know if that was within the scope of this research or not.
Yeah, there are some incredible programs in the IRA, stuff like the methane charge, and the report overall states that, just for the states to aggressively tackle methane emissions in the oil and gas industry, we could create tens of thousands of jobs. And this includes federal funding or federal legislation, such as the IRA.
Great. We actually have a couple more questions in the chat, so I'm going to keep going if folks are, still interested. Rick, we've got a question about whether or not you're planning on talking about this report on Saturday.
Whether I'm talking.
Go ahead.
Yes, definitely.
Great.
That's a short answer.
I don't have context to share for everyone, so
it's a need to know basis.
Great, sounds good. I'm happy to be included in this conversation. We have a question about someone was wondering if oil and gas well remediation as opposed to extraction work classifications fall into the construction job classifications covered by Davis-Bacon from Oren Kadash.
So we know for a fact that the federal government, for the Department of Interior's grant requirements for the off-farmer plugging program, includes Davis-Bacon wage requirements. So states that apply for this funding have to pay, or have to use contractors that pay workers Davis-Bacon wages. So and so I think, for some of these jobs that fall into oil and gas remediation, they could fall under such job classifications.
Great. And then we've got a question from Josiah Rector. Given that most renewable energy jobs are currently not union, what do you think the most promising areas of convergence between union organizing and clean energy and Texas's clean energy expansion are?
I mean, I'll talk. Can I ask you? Want me to answer that? Is that I think that people have no idea what's coming in terms of all the different federal legislation that is dealing with the infrastructure and dealing with climate and dealing with manufacturing. And every one of those federal laws that was passed has very clear requirements in it for wages and labor standards. And what that does is it gives high road employers the opportunity to compete on an equal level. It says that when we're rebuilding this country, we're not going to do it, on the cheap by, because you get what you pay for, and that we're going to do it with quality workforces, and we're going to build our communities. So frankly, it's up to unions unions and their contractors to get engaged and create that convergence. One of the biggest industrial policies that we will ever see has to do with encouraging offshore wind in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, we're talking about thousands and thousands of jobs of construction, of manufacturing, of maritime, of transportation. And the question is going to be, are there going to be union-friendly jobs? They're not going to be union-friendly jobs out of the goodness of the hearts of employers. They're going to be union-friendly jobs because unions and contractors are going to go after it and get that work and make sure that it is. So I don't think there's a static question of who's union-friendly and who isn't. I think more and more employers are going to see that union is a more cost-effective and more quality way to go. And as that happens, I think we're going to see a bigger footprint for unions and their workers as we move forward in this.
Great. Thanks, Rick. That seems like a really good place to wrap up. Gregory, I don't know if there's any closing remarks you want to make, but if not, I'll pass it to Cecilia to close us out.
No, this has been terrific. Really appreciate this opportunity to highlight this work.
And Christopher as well, if you have anything closing you want to say.
Yeah, I just want to say this has been incredible to show evidence that we can create good paying jobs from cleaning up the environment. And this is just in methane alone. There's plenty of opportunities in other areas, but yeah, it's been incredible.
Great. Well, thank y'all so much. Just a huge, sincere thank you to everyone who joined us today and spending time with us to really dive into this, exciting research and what it really means for, our communities and workers here in Texas. I want to say a huge thank you again to Christopher and Greg for all of their work. Thank you so much, Rick, for joining us as well. And, shout out to Luke for walking us through the question section, and the whole Texas Climate Jobs team, and everyone who supported us on getting this research out into the world. We just want to, let folks know how to stay connected with us after this. Here's our website. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Texas Climate Jobs. And I've also shared my email and Christopher's email if anyone wants to follow up. And with that, I will say a final thank you, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day. Thank you so much.